I think given the several amazing albums that we have from Taylor Swift now, it's very easy to overlook her debut record, but it really shouldn't be. Taylor Swift, the album, which I will call debut for the rest of this video to avoid confusion, is such a beautiful little time capsule of not only her teenage years, but of the MySpace era of the internet. Since the advent and rapid growth of the internet, the music industry has transformed in a variety of different ways. Physical CDs nearly wiped out vinyl records. Streaming could have very easily eradicated physical music altogether. TikTok leveled the playing field between major label artists and independent artists. Speaking of independent, I say this as an independent artist, did you know that in 2006, during her debut record era, she technically could have been classified as an independent artist? Big Machine Records was an independent record label that had a distribution deal with Universal Music Group. And back in 2006, Big Machine was a very small record label. Now, by today's standards, no one would consider her an independent artist. But back in 2006, being signed to an independent record label didn't take away your independent artist status. It just gave you a little bit of an extra cushion in order to pursue your musical dreams. But you still probably wouldn't get as many resources or as big of a budget as you would from a major label. A lot of people don't know that when you sign a record contract, that's actually a loan you're being given that you have to pay back before you ever start making money from your own music. I mean, yes, you do get paid and you earn royalties and stuff, but you still have to pay that debt back. Now, I'm aware that in 2023, when we have more conversations about privilege, if I were to call Taylor Swift an independent artist, the indie artist community would cancel me. But back in 2006, getting signed to an independent record label was considered a really cool step in an indie artist's career. I'm sorry, that's how history works, okay? You don't have to flood my comment sections again. Now, I'm sure for some people it would be fun to strip her of that independent title in any capacity, but we're not talking about the new music industry. We're talking about the old one. You've got to rewind the clocks all the way back to 2006, long before people even thought to consider social media as a serious thing. If you were not around during the MySpace era, allow me to take you back. MySpace was basically the world's first social media platform in the way that we know social media now. Have you ever sent out a tweet or an X, whatever it's called now, or posted a status update or captioned a photo? We were all doing that on MySpace. MySpace was really fun because you could customize your profile in so many different ways with different layouts, music, all sorts of different widgets. There was this cool message board where you could message your friends or post things for other people in your network to see, like surveys, about you stuff. Like, it was chill, it was whatever. And if you were a musician, you could set up a music profile. And having a music profile on MySpace was one of the first ways independent artists could share their music online and potentially get it heard by people. And one of the ways Taylor Swift promoted her debut album was on MySpace. One of the original reasons Taylor Swift became so popular, besides being amazingly talented, was the fact that her songwriting was so good it was able to compete with other contemporary country artists at the time. And it was even more impressive because she was so young. Remember, in the old music industry, it was much more common for songs to be written for you as an artist, and then once you proved you could sell records, you might be given the opportunity to write more of your own songs. There were, of course, plenty of exceptions to that, but in country music especially, that was kind of how it was. It certainly was not common for a 16-year-old to be writing her own music, let alone be taken seriously. A problem she would face a lot more, ironically, as she got older. She played shows whenever and wherever she could. Her MySpace was growing. I mean, part of the reason our song was chosen as a single was because it got such great feedback on MySpace. Because both Taylor Swift and Big Machine Records figured out that, oh, maybe social media could be leveraged in order to help us figure out exactly what our artist's audience wants. What a concept. I'm not saying she was the pioneer of that idea. There were plenty of other artists getting signed at this time from MySpace. But it certainly worked to her advantage, and it's a method she has yet to abandon. There is a reason Debut attracted so much attention. Her writing on that album is great, especially for a 16-year-old. I mean, the same girl who wrote, "I hate that stupid old pickup truck you never let me drive," wrote, "You call me up again just to break me like a promise, so casually cruel in the name of being honest." The duality, honestly. At the time of this video, we have 10 studio albums of amazing music from this woman. And if you became a Swiftie later in her career, it might be really easy to ignore this album, but back in 2006, it was critically acclaimed, and for good reason. Breaking into the country music industry is not easy. It is highly restrictive, it is very traditional in its values, and whether you like it or not, you have to be seen a certain way in order to be accepted. And while Miss Taylor Swift might not have an accent anymore, she needed one in 2006 if she wanted to be included in Nashville and the country music industry and get on CMT and do all the award shows. There are, of course, several country artists who are not from the South. In 2006, if you're not from the South, you better be able to prove why you belong. So we can laugh about her country accent now, but in 2006, she needed it. And if you're worried that her country accent might not appear on Taylor Swift Taylor's version, look no further than this record to calm all of your fears. Clearly, she still has it when she needs to. Typically, debut albums from major label artists are very well crafted and heavily influenced by the record label execs. But Taylor Swift was not signed to a major label. She was signed to an independent one, which meant that a freedom she got on her first album that many of her contemporaries did not was the fact that she got to help choose and write her own music. The lyric themes on debut are very much what you would expect from a 16-year-old girl. But even on songs like Picture to Burn, there is a level of maturity in her writing that was not very common at this time. One of the basic requirements for a country song is that it has to have a rich story. The story can be a wide variety of things, but the phrasing has to be a certain way. A great example of a story-driven song is Our Song. The first 4 lyrics of Our Song in the chorus are all metaphors. Our song is the slamming screen door. Our song is sneaking out late. Our song is tapping on your window. Our song is when we're on the phone and you talk real slow because it's late and your mama don't know. She doesn't repeat our song is, our song is, our song is, but that's a really cool writing technique. And all it is crystal clear imagery. I think by today's standards, you could argue that debut does contain a few very typical country tropes. Just a boy in a Chevy truck, Georgia stars, a reference to the South. But there's also such a beautiful innocence to it too. When you think happiness, I hope you think that little black dress, think of my head on your chest and my old faded blue jeans. When you think Tim McGraw, I hope you think of me. It's such a simple thing to want at 16. It's completely rational to think a 16-year-old would tell somebody that they love that when you think of a certain artist or all of their music, I hope you think of me. That beautiful innocence was part of the reason it got people talking. People often argue that you can make a song too personal, meaning that you as a songwriter write something that is so deeply personal that it really only applies to you. And they usually follow that up with, it's just not relatable. And that's just something I flat out disagree with as a songwriter. I think there's nothing more beautiful than telling your personal truth. Because in doing so, you're actually reaching a level of human experience that everyone can relate with. The smartest thing Taylor Swift ever did during her debut era was put Drew's name in Teardrops on My Guitar. Putting a real person's name in a song that is essentially a complete admission of being in love with them, thus stripping away any ambiguity the song could have for a potential listener, challenged that very thought process and was a major success. This song was so popular and so beautifully received that it got a pop mix and it put her on pop radio. And from that moment on, Taylor Swift was a budding country star and a budding pop star. Like I said, you can definitely argue that debut has some typical country tropes. It's very innocent and young, but that does not stop it from being a historically relevant and impeccable record. Sometimes I feel like the impact of Taylor Swift's Fearless album gets lost to time because she's dropped so much amazing music since its creation, but it really needs to be remembered. There are several reasons why it made sense for Taylor to drop Fearless Taylor's version as the first re-recorded album from her re-recording project, and all of it stems back to the significance of the original record. I know that this video won't change any minds and that some of you really cling to the belief that Kanye West made Taylor Swift famous, but that is factually and historically inaccurate. And this album is so much more than just Love Story, You Belong With Me, and the VMA incident. Taylor Swift was the best album-selling artist in 2008. Not 2009 when the VMA thing took place, 2008. A year before. She sold over 4 million albums in 2008 alone. That doesn't even count 2007 and 2006 from her debut record. And if you want to dive into 2009, still before the VMAs, when she dropped You Belong With Me, it was her first #1 hit, and the first country crossover hit to reach #1 on the radio songs chart since Billboard began importing Nielsen SoundScan data in the 90s. Yes, even after the country pop boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. Some of y'all will cling to my comment sections, especially in K-pop, telling me that charts are the only thing that matters. And reminder, this is 4 years before YouTube views counted and streaming was even a thing. If Love Story and You Belong With Me were so popular, why don't they have more streams? Oh, I don't know, maybe because they dropped before the streaming era existed? Be for real, okay? I'm sorry that some of you do not understand how history works, but like, the world existed before you became sentient. Anyway, I digress. In 2008, the music industry was very different. Streaming wasn't a thing, YouTube views were not even thought to count towards the Billboard Hot 100. iTunes and digital downloads was the main way people were consuming music. And once again, in a digital era, she was still selling physical albums long before Kanye West. Anyway, this is an album released also during the global financial crisis and the recession here in the US. And a lot of families, including mine, were hit terribly hard from that. The music industry in the late 2000s was also fighting things like pirating and LimeWire as it struggled to figure out how they were going to cooperate with the digital landscape as it continued to transform. And I don't know if you could tell by any of my deep dives, the music industry is a little slow when it comes to change. People would rip songs from the radio and then upload them to YouTube, or they download the music video and give them away for free on music blogs. Ever wonder why in 2014 when Taylor Swift was fighting Spotify and said music should not be free? And that mentality comes from around this time. Also, artists, songwriters, producers, everybody in the creative arts deserves to get paid for the work that they do. But it's important to remember that this is a recession album. People were losing their jobs, their homes. Bags of chips were containing more and more air in them as people found ways to cheapen productions. You know, the important things. So the thematic elements on this record of love, heartbreak, youthfulness provided a lot of escapism for a lot of people. Her songwriting was improving so much that people started calling her Teen Queen of 2008. Fun fact, a few little production techniques from around this time that were made to sort of combat the pirating problem. You know how in Lady Gaga's song Just Dance it starts off with Red One, Convict, Gaga? Yeah, that little producer tag is a relic from the mid-2000s fighting piracy. Because part of the problem with leaks and illegal downloads was that credit was not being given to who produced or sang the song, thus birthing the producer tag of the mid-2000s that either starts at the beginning or at the end or is somewhere in the middle. If you've ever watched a music video from the late 2000s, you'll know that the music video version of the song sounds slightly different. That was another way to protect the official album version of a song. Also, if you watch a lot of music videos from this time, you'll notice that there are breaks in it to expand on the story or the concept of the video. That was another way to fight piracy so people would not download the music video and upload the MP3 illegally. History. Anyway, Fearless as a record and Taylor Swift as an artist provided a lot of escapism for people who were struggling during this time. In a sea of a lot of club-oriented electro-pop music that was popular, she offered a little something lighter and different. And she was still a teenager. She was still in high school. More and more people were starting to pay attention to her songwriting and the things that she was saying. This is why the album has songs like Change. This chorus, while I think you can argue is probably not the most groundbreaking lyrics she's ever written, was still a message of hope for young kids to hold on to through the recession. Love Story uses the Shakespeare play Romeo and Juliet as a metaphor to compare the protagonist's feelings and relationship with the boy she likes. However, as Taylor noted in one of her earliest interviews about Love Story, she said that Romeo and Juliet is one of the greatest love stories of all time, but it's a tragedy. And so she thought, why can't you just make it a happy ending and put a key change in the song and turn it into a marriage proposal? What if Romeo and Juliet didn't end in sadness? In a very subtle way, and I don't think I thought about this consciously at the time, but again, that's just a little dose of escapism and a little dose of hope during a very unsettling time for millions of people. Does that sound familiar? Fearless and Folklore are a lot alike in that way. Both albums were released in periods of major global unrest. The main key differences between them are that they are opposite ends of her songwriting abilities. Fearless is unbridled, unrestrained personal writing from Taylor as a teenager, and Folklore encapsulates her adult songwriting and her ability to tell a story. So why would she lead off her re-recording project, which was not a guarantee because people didn't want to buy the same thing they already had in a period of global unrest when nobody could afford anything? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because she had already done it and it was pretty damn successful? And it gave birth to 2 of her signature songs, which could help her capitalize off her newfound audience and stoke the flames of nostalgia? Fearless might have some edge and some gut punches, but at its very core, because of the original time period in which it was created, like the title implies, it is supposed to be a message of hope for people who are scared. Provide just a little bit of fantasy to those who need it most. And it successfully did that twice. This album has a much greater global impact than it is ever given credit for, but it was a massive success, and that cannot be understated. Which is another reason why historically, Kanye West did not make her famous. She was already famous! I rest my case. Taylor Swift's Speak Now is so much more than just the one album she wrote by herself. It's almost a little disrespectful to it as a body of work if we don't acknowledge why it even exists in the first place. In the music industry, there is something called the sophomore slump, meaning that typically speaking for any given artist, their second album will either make or break them. It will either sell well and help them in their career, or it won't. It can also refer to, especially with female pop stars, it can refer to how their second album is typically darker, or it's more deep and emotional and personal. And that's because, as I've said in other videos, it was much more common in the old music industry for songs to be written for artists, and then as time goes on, you can get more creative freedom. And when your first album is so restricted by a label and controlled because they want to sell records, that usually leads to a lot of sad feelings, so in their sophomore album, it's usually a little bit darker. It's completely understandable, it's just a silly little trope. Well, in the new music industry that we find ourselves in, that's not as much of the case anymore, because most labels want you to have your own social following and prove that you can sell records before they even think about signing you. Fearless was the complete opposite of all of that. It was super successful, it won tons of awards, 2 of her biggest hits of all time still to this day come from this album. It certainly was no slump and propelled her way forward. But with a whole lot of fame and a whole lot of success comes a whole lot of criticism. One of the biggest things she was criticized for was that she couldn't sing. She performed at the Grammys, and following most of her live performances at the time, if it wasn't written by a fan, it was usually followed with something along the lines of, yeah, she's got great songs, but too bad she can't sing. Another common thing at this time because of the rise of dance pop. Another cool thing to say was, ugh, I just hate that auto-tune pop trash. The problem was that people would throw the word auto-tune to discredit literally any song. Didn't matter the genre. If they were perceived as not being able to sing live, they must use auto-tune on their music. Unfortunately, that's just an old and outdated and incorrect mindset passed down from the silent generation and boomers who unfortunately built the music industry, but that's for a different video. Anyway, the point is people just like to run their mouth. And if you called them on it, you were still wrong. Because internet. But it's true, there are several articles from that time that are still on the internet all talking about how Taylor Swift cannot sing. It's the terrible truth, she just can't sing. Hey, has anybody noticed that Taylor Swift can't sing 2008? The other thing that people wanted to criticize her for was that she was not mature. She was gonna be turning 21, so she needs to act how we decide women should act. I mean, a certain way. Taylor Swift yet to mature as an artist. Speak now. Taylor Swift is angry, darn it. Remember, this is the late 2000s, so female pop stars were expected to get a little sexy as they got older. Try different things, keep us entertained, do something new. Side note, it will never make sense to me how people always want women in music to do more sexy things in their 20s, and then when they do, they complain about it. Make it make sense. Stop setting women up to fail, it's not that hard. Anyway, of course, this is also following Kanye West interrupting Taylor Swift's speech at the VMAs. I know a lot of time has passed since the Taylor Swift-Kanye West interruption, but it really cannot be understated how much of a pop culture moment this was back then. The VMAs are already known for having shocking moment for pop music, but Taylor was a teenager and Kanye West was an adult man. Taylor, just like the rest of the audience and everybody watching around the world, was in shock. Beyoncé was mortified. This is Kanye West's original apology that he posted on his blog. Yes, he had one way back in the dark ages. This moment was like breaking the internet before breaking the internet was a thing. If this were to happen today, y'all would be making TikToks 5 seconds later and going viral for interrupting random things. This moment has been talked about ad nauseum, but it is the moment that eventually led to Speak Now's creation. The other criticism she was fighting, as many people know, was that she didn't write her own music. Unfortunately, people who have never written a song before saw multiple names in her song credits and decided that she couldn't have possibly written her own music. A sentiment that somehow still exists today. Taylor Swift was getting criticized left and right over she couldn't sing, she didn't write her own music, she was too immature. And good old Bob Lefsetz, or however you say his last name, wrote an article that Taylor Swift could not sing and therefore it shortened her career. And just for fun, oh, look, there's that auto-tune word. Like I said, people who have never written or produced a song really like to throw that word around. Anyway, it was after this article that Taylor Swift had enough. You probably know that the original title of Speak Now was Enchanted. However, Taylor Swift's record execs thought that title was too immature for her at that age. And so she walked out of the room, thought for a few minutes, and retitled it as Speak Now. If you've ever listened through Speak Now, you'll know that Enchanted was probably an excellent title for this body of work. But as much as we hate when record execs get their way, they probably were correct to suggest to her to change it. Speak Now as an album can be looked at both ways, as Enchanted and as Speak Now. But it's important to remember that her record label did not choose the title. She still did. Speak Now as a title track is a bit of an odd man out among her discography. It's basically a fantasy about interrupting a wedding. It's imaginative. Mine is all about building a life with someone when you're young. Well, even Better Than Revenge can be interpreted as a fantasy of sorts about getting even with someone. The theme of fantasy and imagination is the most dominating thing on the Speak Now album, making Enchanted probably a better title, but Speak Now is the best title. While the event with Kanye West certainly led to Speak Now's creation, the article about Taylor Swift not being able to sing was an old wound for her. I am certainly not handing credit to these men, but these two events, which maybe to some is not as big of a deal as it was to her, they certainly did lead to her getting a little brave and bold and directly responsive to people in her life. Speak Now as an album carefully wobbles back and forth between person-to-person directly speaking and imagination. An example of person-to-person would be, of course, Dear John. Dear John, I see it all now, it was wrong. Don't you think 19's too young to be played by your dark, twisted games when I loved you so? While we now can certainly honor and appreciate the song for what it is not talked about enough that in 2010, she had a song on her album at 21 about her own personal experience with an inappropriate age difference in a relationship. And they still had the audacity to call this woman immature. Now make that make sense. Back to December is another example of person-to-person directness. I'm so glad you made time to see me. How's life? Tell me, how's your family? I haven't seen them in a while. She's talking directly to this person. Long Live is really interesting though, but another good reason why I tell people when you listen to an album, you gotta listen to it from top to bottom the first time. Because this song balances talking to the fans, person to person directly, and imagination. This song combines both elements, the Enchanted version of the album and the Speak Now version of the album. She doesn't close this album with a ballad or a heartfelt message. This is an inspiration to have fun, feel good, whatever point in your life you are at, have fun. A message that Taylor would continue to echo and try to install in her fans. You can see this in songs like You're on Your Own Kid, Me, Dear Reader, Karma. All of those songs are different models of cars that are driving on the road, but they're still driving on the same road. Taylor Swift wrote Speak Now entirely by herself, and yes, that is incredibly impressive in an age where it was not common. and her singles still competed with other songs at the time. This album is an amazing feat for her and should be a huge source of inspiration to every songwriter out there that, yeah, you are good enough. And just because you rise to criticism, meet it in the moment, and surpass it, does not mean that the credit goes to the people who hurt you. It goes to you because you were the one who overcame it. Speak Now is very akin to Reputation in that way. She had a lot of things that she wanted to say, and so she rose to the moment and said it. Both Reputation and Speak Now have two core elements: the in-your-face, I have something to say to you motif, and the more personal and private meanings. This album is about growing up, but you don't have to grow up in the exact way people who have done it before you decide that you have to. Age is stupid, and as long as you're not hurting anyone, you can do whatever the hell you want, even if it takes you a little while longer to figure out. Red still remains as one of Taylor Swift's most unique albums. In a sea of her discography, it's basically its own island where everyone on it is living their best life. And it's a record that not only sealed her fate once, but twice. I think in the future I might make a deep dive on all of the re-recordings, but we will touch on Taylor's version in this video. Red is very much a transitional album in Taylor's discography, but it's a very necessary step. And one of the best things about it is that the youthful spirit that runs through its veins doesn't care if anyone sees it as anything differently. Red is so similar to everything else that Taylor Swift has done, even now, but it is also its own little entity, and that's what it wants to be. One of the main criticisms Taylor was fighting during the Speak Now era was that she was too immature. People had a very narrow view of what a pop star should be, and she didn't really fit into any of those boxes. Typical millennial being just so weird. But really, even in 2011, people could not figure out if she was a good role model for young women. And people at this time would interchangeably use the term pop star and country star for her, because she was so successful in the pop world and the country world. But dive into music genres and you'll know that at this time, before Red, she was definitely still on the country side of things. Even though on Speak Now, she started to branch out of that a little bit with more rock. Because she was so well known in both communities, pop and country, people began to wonder if she would ever dabble with a full pop song. She'd had plenty of pop remixes to her music. She sang the iconic Super Bass with Nicki Minaj. She moved very easily between both worlds. And in the first part of the 2010s, dance pop music began to evolve into more EDM and dubstep and dance-oriented type of music on a different level. Vine and Instagram and Tumblr were starting to catch fire. Like Psy, when his song Gangnam Style went viral, meme culture was evolving. Like, it was a fun time. And while I don't necessarily think that Taylor was consciously trying to seem more adult, I think because of her personal relationships, she just wanted to be young and have fun. So with this album, she basically says, you know what? All of you are stupid. I am gonna write a pop song. And you know what? I might write a rock song too. I'm gonna keep you guessing because I can. And that's just what she did. For the first time, she wrote music with one of the biggest pop hitmakers of all time, Max Martin. This was super exciting because she was still a country star. And while Max has certainly written country music too, and at this time, Max Martin and Shellback were writing a string of hits that really showed no sign of stopping. So everyone began to wonder if this was when she was finally going to jump to pop. But she said, we're doing both. Actually, you know what? We're gonna do everything. Because I can. What's really exciting about the Red record is that you get to see such a versatile range of her songwriting. That, remember, at this point in 2012, a lot of these styles were new for her, at least from the audience's perspective. On this album, you get to see her lighthearted moments in songs like Stay, Stay, Stay and We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. You get a touch of her pettiness in songs like We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together. You get beautiful, rich stories like All Too Well. Taylor once said State of Grace acts as a warning to the listener for what's about to happen on the rest of the album. And the album opener is such an important key when crafting a record, because when you listen to an album from top to bottom, it often conveys an overarching message that the artist wants to convey. And I never saw you coming, and I'll never be the same. That, to put it very frankly, says, hey, shit's about to go down on this record, enjoy. The fact that this record progresses up and down is very purposeful, because when you're in your early 20s, life is up and down. You're a fresh adult. You get to do things, but you also still kind of feel like a kid, but you're also an adult. Red is definitely Taylor Swift's coming of age record, and it's an exciting one. This track list is supposed to give you whiplash. You go from warning to I'm in love with somebody to ooh, maybe I am in love with somebody. You're an awful person, I hate you. You were mean to me. I don't care, I love myself. I mean, Taylor Swift doing a dubstep country pop song was like, what am I even listening to? And that's because at this age, she just didn't care. She just had fun. Even with its most tender and heartfelt moments, the best thing about it is that Taylor knew criticism of pop music was that it was soulless, so she purposefully went out of her way to write pop music that has soul and good storytelling in it. Remember, just because a song is silly and funny, it's still a story. My favorite thing about We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together is that it plays out exactly how Taylor Swift speaks. I've said this before, but Begin Again being this beautiful country ballad, but still gives such rich details, to the point though where she doesn't actually say all of the details, you can just see it in your mind. When you go through a breakup, you go through all the ups and downs of emotions, especially if the relationship was not a good one. So Begin Again being the album closer is just as important as it is for State of Grace to be the album opener. I, like everyone else, hopes that Taylor one day writes a book, but her songwriting is her tell-all book. More specifically, on Red, State of Grace is the prologue. Thing is though, the tracks in between are a whole lot of middle with a whole lot of peaks and valleys. But by the time you get to Begin Again, it unmistakably is the resolve and the beautiful start of something new. Red effectively sealed the deal that Taylor was going to jump to pop. The thing is though, is she was still painfully aware of public perception of her. She didn't want to alienate her country roots and her country fan base, but she also wanted to try new things. And somehow, miraculously, she successfully did it. Another example of Taylor Swift getting criticism, meeting it in the moment, and overcoming it. While in hindsight, from our perspective in the future, it would have been fun to have 22 or All Too Well be the lead single of Red, but those songs don't describe what this record is trying to say. They are pieces of it, and essential ones at that. It certainly couldn't have been I Knew You Were Trouble. She hadn't really introduced herself as a pop star officially yet. That song already gave people whiplash. And then there was The Goat that made it even more iconic. So We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together being a country song with a pop chorus is the smartest one to go with. Red in a lot of ways is a breakup album, but it's also kind of a finding new love album too. It's got country lyrics that are akin to Taylor Swift, Fearless, and Speak Now. It's got impeccable storytelling akin to Folklore and Evermore. It birthed iconic pop hits similar to 1989 Reputation, Lover, and Midnights. And whatever it is that makes you like Taylor Swift, you can probably find it on this record, which is exactly why Red Taylor's version had such a long rollout. This girl is an expert music marketer, okay? Let's not lie to ourselves and say she isn't. The re-recording project, while very exciting in 2021, still had many people of the mindset, why am I buying the same thing I already own? She was a genius to lead off with Fearless Taylor's version and open with one of her biggest hits, Love Story, but it was still a country album that had aged well over a decade at that point. And there was a whole new generation of music consumers reaching their early 20s at this point that probably didn't grow up with Fearless. But you know what album they probably did grow up with? Red. It's still a trend for people to turn 22 and play 22 at midnight. Which, by the way, I love those videos. They make me so happy. They're super fun. And courtesy of Folklore and Evermore, we hadn't heard her sing a pop song in a while, the same way we hadn't heard a pop song from her at the time of its original release. So hype for it, rightfully so, snowballed. Dropping nostalgic pop songs for people who grew up with this record and giving fans a long-awaited version of a song that was already so critically acclaimed. And whether they are the original lyrics or not does not matter. She somehow made one of her best songs even better. And releasing it in the fall-winter when people are at their most moodiest, and then practically shattering the internet because of its viral action, and then sending that 10-minute version to #1 on the Billboard charts because people who had just become fans due to Folklore and Evermore and finally agreed that her songwriting was good. All Too Well 10-minute and Red Taylor's version sealed the deal with the general public that the re-recording project, even through the pandemic, was something to pay attention to, and that there was more to Taylor Swift than they might have originally thought, which opened the floodgates for the rest of the re-recording project. And the funniest thing about Red original version and Red Taylor's version is that she followed both of them up with a bona fide pop album. 1989 is one of Taylor's most interesting chapters in her career because it's one of her most commercially successful, but also extremely transformative for her as a person and as an artist. Taylor Swift, Fearless, and Speak Now kind of exist as sort of a trilogy of sorts. They're her most country-sounding albums. She was a teenager for most of the process for them. And as many Swifties know, Speak Now was originally titled Enchanted, but that was deemed too immature of a title by her record label for her age at the time. And then Red sort of exists as its own little collection of music that acts as a bridge between her country eras and her pop eras. But we'll get to that in a future video. 1989 is when she went full pop, and this was a big turning point in her career. But it's also one of her most natural segues too. Taylor Swift has been on pop radio essentially since Teardrops on My Guitar got a pop mix. So pop music fans have been very used to Taylor Swift for most of her career. So by the end of her Red era, she was already starting to be considered a pop girl. But as I mentioned in a previous video, it's important to remember that before we even arrive at 1989, Taylor Swift has been battling the media for a lot of different things. They called her a serial dater and a player. A lot of people still didn't take her songwriting seriously. The battle that Taylor Swift has had to fight against misogyny should be its own full-length documentary one day. And in the YouTube era of It Gets Better videos, she makes the Mean music video, which sort of slowly starts to allude to her personal beliefs. The country music industry is traditionally very conservative, and they don't like when people get political. Look at what happened with the Chicks. Unless it is very pro-America, pro-conservative beliefs. And Taylor's from Pennsylvania. She's not from the South, so she had to be careful with what she said, especially because literally anything she did would send the media into a frenzy. So in order to transition properly and smoothly out of the country music industry, taking the popularity of songs like 22 and We Are Never Ever Getting Back Together into account, she went straight to pop hit makers Shellback and Max Martin, who, if you don't know, are responsible for a lot of now signature pop songs. Sometimes songs that they've done together, sometimes just one or the other. Blinding Lights, Teenage Dream, Baby One More Time, I Want It That Way, so on and so forth. Shake It Off is a brilliant lead single for a variety of reasons. Sonically, it's very similar to that of songs like 22. It's very clearly a dance pop song, but the instrumentation does have that sort of jazziness feel, which is not necessarily present on the synth pop dominating sound that is present on the rest of 1989. Shake It Off both visually and lyrically makes fun of herself and the media all at once. Another criticism of Taylor Swift that she was battling at this time was that she was an awkward millennial, so she couldn't dance. Yeah, the ERAS tour called in 2023 and has some words to say about that. I go on too many dates, but I can't make them stay. At least that's what people say. Because that's literally what people said about her. Jokes aside, this sort of idea is a central motif on the rest of 1989. Initial criticism, at least from fans of the 1989 record, is that it is her least complex lyrically. Pop music frequently faces a criticism, especially at this time, that it is not lyrically deep. There's no soul to it. If you followed my account for any time, you'll know that I definitely do not agree with that. But around this time, fans were very concerned that she was gonna lose a lot of what made her lyrics so special. And while yes, I think by today's standards, you could argue that it is one of her least lyrically complex as compared to albums like Speak Now or Folklore and Evermore. But I don't think she should be discredited for her writing on 1989 because this was a brand new style for her. In 2023, we are of course very used to Taylor writing great pop songs. But in 2014, this was still brand new. And while yes, she did collaborate with the biggest hitmakers of the time, if you've studied Taylor Swift's work for any amount of time, you'll recognize that these thoughts, opinions, phrases are very much her style. Sonic crafting and production style doesn't take away from songwriting, it's just an extension of it. I mean, the entirety of Blank Space is one of her earliest examples of writing as a character akin to the Folklore and Evermore albums. I mean, not only did Taylor Swift move away musically from the country music industry, she physically moved to New York, which is typically speaking a little bit more liberal than the South, and that's just lightly touched on songs like Welcome to New York. A track that is all about starting over, a rebirth, which is exemplified by the title, 1989. Unfortunately, though, not everyone got it. Taylor Swift's albums are all very symbolic of certain time periods of the internet. I know it's hard to believe for some people that the internet was completely different in the early 2010s to what it is now, but 1989 takes place during the Tumblr, Vine, and Instagram era of the internet and social media culture. Taylor Swift is not from the streaming era, she's from the physical CD era of music. Streaming royalties for artists, no matter your size, are very, very small. Yes, pennies add up, but they are still small. Actually, we're talking less than pennies per stream. And that business model was not received very well by the traditional music industry. FYI, it's still not that great. I would know every time I get my royalty paycheck. Anyway, long story short, Taylor Swift protests Spotify, and now she's kind of the reason our paychecks are just slightly higher, thus really helping to begin the streaming revolution of the music industry. But because of the social media boom during this time, that did not always go in her favor. One of the unfortunate consequences for millennials being the first generation online is that we had to learn how to navigate cyberbullying on our own. Taylor Swift was already fighting the media in the traditional sense and the tabloids, but now she was fighting it in the digital sense. As an active social media user at the time, like we all were. Anxiety, eating disorders, depression, those are all consequences of not being able to escape constant criticism. But for someone who was already battling such criticism at a high, intense level from traditional media, now couldn't escape it from the digital sense. When summer 2016 rolls around and hashtag Taylor Swift is over party begins, people were just looking for a reason to hate her. And not just hate her, celebrate her downfall and love watching her burn. So even though 1989 as a record is sonically a lot more lighter than some of her other albums, the whole larger picture around the record is much darker than you would think. 1989 and Reputation have similar lyrical themes, but their focuses are different. 1989 at large is a playful way of ignoring what people say about you, whereas Reputation centers that motif and attacks things head on. You could even argue that 1989 and Reputation are sister albums akin to Folklore and Evermore. They take place around the same time, they deal with similar motifs, they have several song examples of satire, it's just that one is light and fun and the other one is dark and serious. 1989 and Reputation for what they stand for at large, and their overarching message of the misconception of personal experience versus people's perception, 1989 and Reputation are essentially two sides of the same coin. There are several reasons why I believe Taylor Swift's Reputation is one of the greatest music comebacks of all time, but it's also an important moment in internet history to never forget. In order to properly understand Reputation, you have to understand the difference between accountability and cancel culture. Accountability is you do something wrong, whether intentional or not. People most likely explain to you why what you did was perceived as offensive. You can own up to your mistakes, explain your situation a little bit, and then move on. What Taylor Swift experienced with hashtag Taylor Swift is over party was cancel culture and a good example of the audience getting it wrong. And the reason this is cancel culture and not accountability is because, as we all learned later and has since been proven to be correct, she didn't really do anything wrong to take accountability for. Dating men, well, not recommended, is not a criminal offense. Taylor Swift is Over Party did not just happen on Twitter. It was happening on Instagram with people posting snakes. It happened on Facebook. It was an internet-wide event. But the sad thing is that this behavior still continues to this day, but it gets misconstrued with actual accountability. People say they're being canceled when really the audience is saying, hey, maybe don't be racist. When I typically see fans praise Reputation, it usually comes from loving the sound, loving the album, which if you've ever listened to the album, you'll know that it's basically a collection of love songs disguised as bad bitch anthems. It's no secret that female pop stars are held to an impossibly high standard. I mean, typically speaking, if you go to a male concert, they stand and sing. If you go to a female concert, there's outfit changes, there's theatrics, there's fireworks. And unfortunately, women in music are consistently expected to outdo themselves. So when people comment on Reputation when they're not talking about the sonics of the record directly, they're usually talking about how much she's grown since this horrible event in her life. But there's another aspect to Reputation that I think is important to not forget and to continually discuss. Madonna, Britney, Beyonce, Princess Diana, I mean, so many women in positions of power have often talked about the unfair standards that they are held to. And then people get to praise them when they reinvent and they do what people like. They're even praised for calling it out if they do it in a way that we like. But the thing I think Taylor Swift deserves a lot more credit for is confronting everything all at once head on. Reputation was either going to be the end of Taylor Swift's career or it was going to be a renaissance. And I think we know which way it went. I know this is going to be controversial to say, but I will die on this hill of Taylor Swift's and say that I think still to this day, Look What You Made Me Do is one of the best lead singles she has ever released. While we can love and appreciate it now, it's important to remember that when this song dropped, people did not like her, so they didn't like the song. Her owning the snake thing was viewed as cringy. Oh, a female pop star goes dark and does a dance routine. Wow, groundbreaking, we've never seen that before. The lyrics of the song were picked apart as being one of her worst examples of her songwriting, but it all laughs in the face of what this song actually stands for. Look What You Made Me Do is a common phrase used against people who are perceived as playing the victim. Because back in 2016-2017, that was the common statement used for her, the lyrics of the chorus are structured very similar to that of Out of the Woods. Both songs use essentially one line that is heavily repeated in order to draw a larger emphasis on something else. In the case of Out of the Woods, the heavy repetition symbolizes the feeling of anxiety. In the case of Look What You Made Me Do, it symbolizes an echo chamber. The title is repeated 8 times in order to symbolize people all saying the same thing. In this case, Taylor Swift can't play the villain and the victim. I know people like to hold on to the phrase, there will be no explanation, there will just be reputation, but her explanation is in the verses of this song. The thing that's just really cool is she flip-flops between telling the truth and playing the victim. But I got smarter, I got harder in the nick of time, honey, I rose up from the dead, I do it all the time. That's just commentary on women being held to an impossible standard and being expected to overcome it. The world moves on, another day, another drama, but not for me, all I think about is karma. Again, she acknowledges that the world has moved on from Taylor Swift, but she hasn't forgotten what they did because she knew she was right. I still believe to this day that there are Easter eggs in the Look What You Made Me Do music video that we will never understand because she had so much she wanted to say and she had one shot to do it. While I definitely agree Taylor certainly deserves her credit and praise for being able to grow from this awful moment in time for her, she should also be remembered and praised for saying essentially, hey, you were wrong and I'm not letting this go. Because if she hadn't already built a career based on her life story and telling it through song, this whole project would not have worked. While Reputation and 1989 at the time were her 2 most pop records, Reputation features a lot more complex lyricism, even in its most simplest offerings. And that's because if she was going to take everything head on, all at once, she needed it to be simple, but effective. If Taylor Swift's debut album is Hello, in a lot of ways, Lover is goodbye. But not goodbye in the way you might think. I've said before that Taylor Swift, Fearless, and Speak Now are sort of a trilogy, and that same sort of feeling applies to 1989, Reputation, and Lover. Truthfully, I could talk about the Lover album for decades and not run out of things to say about it. Because in a lot of ways, Lover is like the final season in your favorite TV show. It's a culmination of everything that happened before it in all the seasons prior, but it still leaves just enough open to wonder what might happen afterward. Reputation was far more successful than it was expected to at the time. She finally started telling her story following the Taylor Swift Is Over party. It went #1, I'm pretty sure Delicate and Ready for It stayed on the radio for approximately an eternity. Every retail and grocery store worker can probably confirm that. She sold out the Reputation Stadium tour. Little by little, positive public reception of her was being restored. Whether anyone wants to admit it or not, pop music is directly tied to the state of the world we live in. There's a reason a lot of pop music in the late 2010s was very dark, or it was dreamy, it was atmospheric. It was all about the vibe, and that's directly tied to a lot of political unrest. It's why in the first half of that same decade, it's the polar opposite of fun, upbeat, dance pop, EDM. It's because there wasn't as much political or environmental unrest. And while Reputation definitely does come from Taylor Swift's own life experiences at that time, it's also not exempt from that connection. And while Reputation's main core theme of finding love is kept in secret underneath the layers of it, Lover is the complete polar opposite of that. It is that love story out completely in the open. Taylor said that this album contains a lot of different types of love on it, and that is really true. I Forgot That You Existed is self-care and self-love. Lover is obviously about being in love. Soon You'll Get Better is that caring type of love for somebody who's going through something medically that you can't fix. But there's another aspect to Lover that I think gets overlooked unless you've gone through it. And that's the fact that it feels like a finale of your 20s. 1989, Reputation, and Lover are sort of triplets because they accurately describe what it is like to go through your mid to late 20s. When you're 24, 25, you're calmer, but you still don't care and you want to have fun. When you're 26, 27, you start to realize that people around you are older, not just you. And some of them may even start to slip away from you. And by the time you're 28, 29, people are trying to tell you that you're already 30, even though you're not. And then you're left with this sort of, what do I do now feeling if everyone has written me off as 30, but I'm not 30? Is 30 so bad? What do I feel? Another really cool thing about coming into your own in your late 20s is you start to get a backbone a little bit more. You're a full-fledged adult, so you can speak your mind. Tell your truth, speak your opinions, stand firmly in what you believe. You also unlearn old mindsets. You start to see the world differently. And that doesn't have to be a negative thing like it is so oftentimes painted as. Lover is when we got confirmation that Taylor Swift would in fact be re-recording her entire first 6 albums. It was really not until Lover, 4 years ago, mind you, that we started to get more political opinions from her. I mean, she advocated several times for the Equality Act. I mean, the sales and success of You Need to Calm Down led to major donation spikes for GLAAD. She took misogyny head-on in a way that she had not done directly before. She even said in the Miss Americana documentary, people will start to age you out of the music industry in your early 20s, and she's approaching 30. She didn't know how much longer people would put up with her releasing music. And unfortunately, that mindset still continues to this day. For some reason, some people just cannot seem to understand that you are not old at 30, and nor do you completely lose all of your previous interests and hobbies and things you love to do. I know, it's almost like you're kind of the same person you were 2 seconds before you blew out the candles on a birthday cake. And her success following Lover, even given the fact that she's Taylor Swift, should send a message that, no, you're not too old to do music. And artists extending their careers well into their 30s and being successful with it, whatever form that looks like, should be a celebrated thing. I mean, she says so many different things on the Lover album that by the time you get to Daylight, which was the original title of Lover if you didn't know, and had she not written Lover, it absolutely makes sense. The first verse acknowledges her own mistakes. Wow, she wasn't perfect in her 20s. Luck of the draw only draws the unlucky, and so I became the butt of the joke. I wounded the good and I trusted the wicked, clearing the air I breathed in the smoke. Wow, the story of Reputation in 4 lyrics. I want to be defined by the things that I love, not the things that I hate, not the things that I'm afraid of. That literally is a 29-year-old approaching 30, not knowing how the world is going to remember them. So Lover's whole aesthetic is bright colors, sparkly outfits, butterflies, clouds, and daydreaming, like childhood innocence. She's saying goodbye to her innocence. And yes, your childhood innocence can extend through your 20s and even into your 30s if you allow it. So I know it is not a fan favorite. Believe me, I've seen your videos and comments. But if Taylor was going to effectively end her 20s and that sort of bright-eyed wonder, Me is the perfect lead single to launch that whole theme. It's bright, it's fun, it's carefree, it's not supposed to be that deep. It is dance pop in an era where it was not okay to release a dance pop song. It is the pure antithesis to everything that was going on in the state of the world at that time, and what had just happened in her own personal world. I understand that people argue that Me is too cringy, it's too silly, especially for somebody who is supposed to be an adult. That again is a uniquely millennial experience. We were told that by our late 20s, we should be at certain places in our lives, and that was just not the world we were born into. So we made up our own rules and held on to our childhood even into our adulthood because life was just a little too scary to not do so. It's a song hoping to inspire the listener to hold on to their innocence no matter what age they are, in the same way songs like You're on Your Own, Kid do. I'm not saying you have to like the song, not everyone likes dance pop. But it is such a shame to me that so many people miss its inspiring message just because it comes across as silly and fun. But that's the whole point of it, and that's the whole point of the Lover era. But the Lover era was not just a goodbye to her 20s either. It's a goodbye to the old music industry, the one that she started out her entire career in. Make the album tour, write the pop song, title goes on the cover. Do the dance routine, sell all the records, rinse and repeat. In 2019, streaming was just starting to become the main way people were consuming music. There were still plenty of debates going on about royalty payouts. While we didn't know exactly what would entail with the re-recording project, we now know that this woman has flipped the industry on its head several times. One of the ways she consistently does that is through Easter eggs. The Lover House ignited a lot in the Swiftie fandom. Whether it was intentional or not is up for debate, but the Lover House and the Man Wall were something to hang on to during the pandemic for fans. I think it's probably safe to say that we would have gotten another pop album from Taylor Swift following Lover, but as much as I truly love her, I don't know if it would have led to the sheer celebrity status that she is at now. Because unfortunately, during Lover, there were still people who did not believe in her songwriting, which is what Folklore ultimately proved. One of my favorite things, though, about the Lover era is how it sort of ends. We get the Miss Americana documentary and the Man music video. Then the pandemic happens and we essentially all go into hiding. The Man music video might have come in February, but it was released January 27th. Which means in some ways the Lover era ends with Miss Americana, which is exactly where the ERAS tour begins. This tour essentially starts right where we left off with her before the pandemic. So in several ways, the Lover album is a happy goodbye to who she was, the old music industry, the way she used to do things, her reputation, her music, and beautifully so much more. Because literally, the world and her career has not been the same since. In terms of her career, Taylor Swift's Folklore is a beautiful, happy, amazing, wonderful, on-purpose accident. I said in my deep dive on Lover that the Lover album feels like the last season in your favorite TV show. For all intents and purposes, Daylight serves as the series finale to Taylor Swift's career at that point. It's a beautiful culmination and resolve to everything that had happened in her life at that point. There was no guarantee that the re-recording project for her would be a success. She was approaching 30 at the time, and people love to push people out of the music industry at that age for whatever reason. There was no ERAS tour. If that had been the last album before she decided to do different things, including her re-recording project, then to her, I think she was trying to communicate that it would be okay. But there's still enough open through Lover and through Daylight to leave something open for the future. And the future had different plans. 2019 and 2018 were the age of the surprise drop. Artists would just drop a new single or a new album without any warning to their fans. Because in the age of streaming, which was rapidly growing at this time, it was different, and it was fun. It was especially common for independent artists to do it. The only artist who really hadn't done a surprise drop was Miss Taylor. And her transition into music that was more of a vibe was very symbolic of the changing music industry as it switched its target audience from millennials to Gen Z. Typically speaking, not the case for everyone, I know, the typical Gen Z pop demographic likes songs that are moody, shorter, atmospheric. They like a bop, but if it's too dance pop or too much of a banger, it sounds dated. On the flip side, the typical millennial age pop demographic likes songs that are bangers. They like songs that provide escapism so they don't have to think about monotony. Gen X and boomers have their own styles of pop music that they loved in the 70s and 80s. Music tastes and styles change as time goes on. So the surprise dropping an album and changing genres thing is the extent of the on purpose part. Getting with the times in music marketing and reinventing her sound, I think, is the only natural thing that happened with this record. I think those two things were gonna happen regardless of whatever album she made after Lover. We probably would have gotten another pop album from her, but I think the sound would have been different, which would naturally align her with modern music marketing and a changing age demographic. But those are the only things I would say were on purpose about this record. That's on the marketing side. Everything else regarding this record is a natural response to the pandemic and her artistry and who she already was. The Man music video dropped at the end of February, and it was just a week or two later that lockdowns started happening all across the globe. As I previously mentioned, the music industry was still in a transitional period, not only trying to still recover from the streaming revolution and figuring out royalties, but now the market was definitely different and Gen Z was growing up. Then TikTok blew up, sending virtually unknown people to the top of the Hot 100. Meanwhile, artists who have things planned years in advance have to cancel their tours, cancel their projects, figure out how to do merch and physical merchandise because productions are shut down. Meanwhile, vinyl starts to have this major resurgence. There was major political unrest, environmental disasters. I still remember when somebody commented on one of my videos telling me that if an artist didn't release a song every 6 weeks, they were irrelevant and needed to give up their careers. If you think for 1 second that in 2020 the music industry knew what the hell it was doing, you are kidding yourself. And during all of that chaos, Miss Blondie slipped away and did what she did best. Write. In order to really appreciate folklore, you have to know a little bit of genre history. Country, folk, rock, alternative, and pop music all evolved from each other. In the 1960s, what we know as pop music would have been called rock music back then, because rock music was the popular style of the times. Even as 70s disco was evolving, it was still called rock music by some people. And a tiny little historical evidence of that is in ABBA's Dancing Queen. With a bit of rock music, everything is fine. They mean pop music, but they're calling it rock music, because rock was the pop music. I hope that makes sense. Folk music is an offshoot of country music, and Taylor Swift is a trained country artist. Everything she does is rooted in the country music industry and the country genre. The biggest selling point, even from the very beginning of Taylor Swift's career, was her songwriting. People for years have wanted her to write a book or a novel, and we finally got that wish in the forms of Folklore and Evermore. Ask almost any country artist or songwriter, at the heart of every country song is a good story. And a lot of that stems from Black slaves creating bluegrass music because they couldn't read or write. It was the way they could tell their stories and their family histories in the South. I'm keeping this brief for the purposes of this video. The point is, a collection of folk songs would be a very natural transition for somebody who is already so ingrained in the country music industry. Yes, even if this artist in particular had not been a country star in a while. So in the dead middle of summer, Taylor drops a project that is completely out of left field, with barely any warning, sending her fan base and the internet into a frenzy. This album went viral for all the right reasons. At this point in her career, she was just considered Taylor Swift pop star by the general public. She existed, she did her pop thing, she was just a pop girl. And at this point, a lot of her original country fan base had just sort of resolved that she would not be a country star anymore, in spite of still sprinkling it in every so often. People also noticed that there was an explicit version to some of her songs. It seems wild and funny to think about now, but at this point, nobody had even really heard her say the F word. So as a response to being isolated during the pandemic, she threw out her old rulebook and saw what happened. And what happened was a beautiful body of work. For Folklore being arguably one of her most chill records, this is Taylor Swift completely unrestrained. It's a dedicated concept album, which means there's a strong central motif or theme throughout the entirety of the record. In this case, the teenage love triangle and how most of the songs are told from each of their perspectives. This album is the novel that people craved from Taylor, and that's part of the reason it was so successful. Because every single one of these songs is a beautiful story. But I love that it also still kind of plays out like one of her more traditional records. The opening line, "I'm doing good, I'm on some new shit, been saying yes instead of no," can be seen as her telling her fans, yes, I'm doing fine, just letting you know I've been doing some different things. And it can also be seen as her telling herself that I'm saying, yes, I should write in this style, I should write these lyrics, I should say the F word. And then it begins the storytelling that's going to be present on the rest of the album. Cardigan in particular has a little bit of those pop hooks, and it plays out kind of like a pop song. It has a couple verses, transitions into a chorus, then another verse, chorus, like it's very traditional, which coupled with the music video reintroduces her as a singer-songwriter. Not that she wasn't already, but more so reintroduces her as the girl with the guitar. The lyrics on Cardigan as a single don't play out like a pop song. They are very much rooted in country, bluegrass, folk. So this song in particular gives pop familiarity, but it also introduces what the rest of the record's gonna sound like and reminds people that, oh, she is a songwriter. That's what we've been trying to tell you. Okay, get with the program. And it's because this record was so successful and she probably had so much fun writing it that she kept going for Evermore. She uses large words that you would not find in typical pop music. She leans more into familiar territory with rock and country and folk sounds. She uses a lot more advanced synonyms and terminology that you would not find typically in for the masses music. And it's much more akin to the type of words you would find in a novel. Folklore is the long-awaited novel that fans had been wanting from her for many years. I don't think this was Taylor Swift's intention given the pandemic and everything that was going on at the time, but I do think a happy consequence to her finally breaking the chains that was her old rulebook for songwriting was that it set the stage for her to truly become and get recognized as one of the greats. Taylor may write and produce music with other people, but it doesn't change the fact that she is still capable of writing a song in almost any genre, and do it well enough that it still competes with seasoned pros in those respective genres. People thought that once Taylor switched to pop music, that was all that she could naturally do, but it's not. There's a reason people are requesting a rock album from her one day. And we now know that just because she drops an album in one genre doesn't mean that the other genres are off the table forever, which is exactly how we got Midnight's 4 albums later. Folklore, Evermore, Fearless TV, and Red TV. In many ways, you can argue that Folklore is the start of her new career. Everything past Lover. It's not directly about her life, even though I'm sure it contains a few things here and there, most of which we'll probably never know. For a woman that has battled the media for so many years by the time this album came out, Folklore was an unintentional checkmate against the media. She protected her personal life and still defied the odds that she could grow after 30. Taylor Swift is certainly not above criticism, but you cannot call her stupid. This is the album that got people to see who she really is, and ironically, it's the album that disguises her the most. Taylor Swift's Evermore album is a lot more than just a sister record to Folklore. While yes, the two albums go hand in hand, they are still their own entities. And even though it was only released a few months after Folklore, it's still a product of internet culture at that time. 2020 is a year that none of us will soon forget, though, try as we might. And it was a year that turned the entire music industry up on its head. Major label artists had to figure out how to record at home in isolation. Albums and song releases got delayed. Physical releases had their entire productions shut down. Everyone had to learn how to film a music video while wearing a mask and getting tested. There were no vaccines. You really can't separate Folklore and Evermore away from the pandemic because in doing so, you're sort of writing over their history. After all, as Taylor has repeatedly said, that these two albums are birthed from the pandemic. But just 1 year prior, Taylor dropped the first album that she would completely own, Lover. But it's also the last album we would get from her before the phone call between her and Kanye West finally leaked in its entirety in 2020. It was during the Lover era that we found out she would in fact be re-recording her first 6 albums, and instead of getting a tour for Lover, we were gonna get a music festival called Loverfest. Then the pandemic happened and none of that came true. It's difficult to say exactly what Taylor would have done following Lover if the pandemic had not happened, but I imagine it probably would have been another pop album. Because at this point, she had done 3 pop albums, she was a pop star, she was a pop girl. Then the pandemic happens, political unrest, natural disasters. I mean, 2020 was an event. And people were trying really hard to figure out what to hold on to because the music industry was going in 700 different ways. Streaming really took off because nobody could go buy music. Not that it wasn't continually rising anyway. While everyone in the world was trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, Taylor just sort of slipped away and did what she does best. Writing. The thing about Taylor Swift is that she is an expert in music marketing. And one of the reasons she's so good at music marketing is because from the very beginning, she has been directly involved with her fans. I mean, they literally come to her house several times. She followed them on Instagram and Tumblr. Like, she knows her fans. She knows what it's like to be a music fan. And because she knows them so well, she knows that they like to be surprised. I say this as one independent artist to another. If you are an indie artist and you are trying to figure out how to release a record, you should look at Taylor Swift. And the thing you should hone in on is the fact that she knows her fan base. This is an artist who can consistently sell physical music in the digital age. Taylor Swift and K-pop artists are the same thing. In this essay, but seriously, she knows her fans. She knows what they like. She knows the merch that they would buy. She knows where they shop. She knows where they eat. I don't mean that as a stalker. I mean, she just talks to her fans. She may not do it as much now as a woman in her 30s who is busy, but this woman has spent nearly 2 decades getting to know the people who love and resonate with her music. In my opinion, that should be a goal for every artist out there. One of the things she knows that we love is we love to be surprised. If you know Taylor Swift and you know music marketing, you'll know that Taylor does not really like to release an album the same way twice. Unless in doing so, it would keep her fans eager to buy, excited, and surprised. While Evermore has left us all living in a state of constant terror that Taylor Swift will drop another album at any given second, in all reality, it's probably unlikely because this woman can sell physical music and she can sell a lot of it. I mean, 1 in every 25 vinyl albums sold in the US in 2022 was a Taylor Swift album. Folklore and Evermore dropped via surprise because it's what was possible at the time. For someone who can sell that amount of music, who was only continuing to grow following these 2 records, and was about to launch a gigantic re-recording project, a surprise drop was already something she hadn't done, so she did it with Folklore. A second surprise drop was definitely something she hadn't done, so she did it with Evermore. This allowed her to get music out quickly, but also allowed a lot of wiggle room for physical music production given the unprecedented times we were living in. Another reason these surprise drops worked was because of TikTok. TikTok was transforming the music industry, and its virality helped these records get so much attention. So much content was being produced about these records that she really didn't have to give interviews or go on a tour or do any of the traditional promotional things, which led her to joining TikTok. TikTok was making viral hits for independent artists. I mean, if you were on TikTok in 2021, you'll remember what it was like when every major label artist joined this app, and that was made incredibly apparent because of Evermore. No one expected Taylor Swift to drop a second full-length studio album 5 months after already dropping one. Because the only business model we had at the time for Taylor Swift was release an album, that's my era, I'm moving on, I would actually argue that Evermore had more of an impact on Taylor Swift's staying power than it is ever properly given credit for. Had this album not come out, there still would have been a long gap between Folklore and Fearless Taylor's version. This is the album that kept everyone's attention on her. Folklore finally got a lot of people paying attention to her songwriting, but Evermore is more of a return to form because this album has a lot of strong country influence. And Taylor Swift is a trained country singer and songwriter. It's been compared to the works of Emily Dickinson several times, and rightfully so, but stories about no crime is very present in bluegrass traditional country music. I Come Back Stronger Than a 90s Trend is not just a brilliant line, but that one silly little line set the tone for what was going to happen the next few years in her career, which we are currently still living through. Evermore might be in some ways sonically similar to Folklore, but in many ways it's its own collection of stories that really all stand strong on their own. It's not a collection of B-sides. I think one of the strongest examples of where her country storytelling comes through is Tolerate It. In songwriting, regardless of your genre, the chorus is typically where your simplest phrases are. That helps create what are called hooks. And this is true in any genre of music. But Tolerate It takes a writing style that is very akin to songs like Begin Again. I wait by the door like I'm just a kid, use my best colors for your portrait, lay the table with the fancy shit, and watch you tolerate it. Like, that's just powerful, not to mention the last chorus. Break free and leave us in ruins, took this dagger in me and removed it, gained the weight of you and then lose it, believe me, I could do it. In Begin Again, she uses the same writing style in the chorus, but it paints a different picture. Both songs use storytelling and longer phrases in their choruses as opposed to more simple ones. So while we can all joke that Evermore is the forgotten child, when you dive into everything that was going on before, during, and after this album and the content inside it, it truly is unforgettable. I think Midnights is one of the most intriguing records Taylor Swift has ever produced because it's arguably one of her most personal. I'm going to do a separate video on my thoughts on the ERAS tour and how Midnights ties into that, but there are so many layers to Midnights that are easy to miss if you're newer to Taylor Swift or you're just not as familiar with her entire discography. One of the coolest things about Taylor Swift as an artist is she is one of the very few people that can get her entire fandom to know her entire discography, no skips. Yes, every Swiftie has their favorites and least favorites, but chances are Swifties are gonna know the lyrics to even the songs that they don't like. Remember that when we talk about the ERAS tour. I think in order to appreciate the depth of Midnights, you really have to know some of her hidden gems across all of her albums. When Midnights came out, nobody knew what sound she was gonna go for. Folklore and Evermore were big hits. She had dropped Fearless Taylor's version and Red Taylor's version. Hell, a lot of people didn't even think we were going to get a new album from her until after the re-recording project was done. But Blondie has trained us to stay on constant red alert. And by this time, the pandemic was slightly getting better. People were gathering in crowds again. We found out later she had quoted lyrics from this album at her NYU graduation speech. There were Easter eggs for 1989 and Speak Now at the same time. We even had 2 songs from 1989 Taylor's version. So everyone kind of naturally assumed that she was going to wrap up the re-recording project first before diving into new material. Once again, to be a Swiftie is to be a clown. Midnights is a concept album, meaning there is a strong central motif or theme throughout all of the songs. And for summary purposes, Taylor said that each of the songs were written on different midnights and they had to do with something in her life. In other words, it's the first body of new work from her that does directly come from her life that we had gotten in a while. I think there are probably bits and pieces of her personal life on Folklore and Evermore, but it's certainly not the focus, and she certainly disguised it well. I think you can argue that Taylor was setting up for something like Midnights at the end of Lover, but given the way history went, I don't think it would have taken on this form exactly. Because the songs on Midnights can essentially be broken up into 2 categories: retrospection and introspection. I'll give you some examples. The easiest one is Question. One thing that Taylor placed an emphasis on Midnights as opposed to her previous records was sonic texture. She plays with a lot of filters, a lot of different vocal effects, create certain moods and atmospheres. Every song in one way or another is supposed to mimic the feeling of a dream. Question opens with a filtered vocal interpolation from Out of the Woods with I Remember. The main refrain in Out of the Woods is, "Are we out of the woods yet? Are we out of the woods yet? Are we out of the woods yet?" It's panic. Question, however, takes place years later and sees the protagonist of Out of the Woods calm enough and out of the woods of that relationship to ask these questions. A question song being responded with another question song. Midnight Rain is an adult retrospection on Back to December. The protagonist in Midnight Rain is reflecting on a relationship that was very good that she did not treat very well. He was sunshine, I was midnight rain. He wanted it comfortable, I wanted that pain. He wanted a bride, I was making my own name, chasing that fame. He stayed the same, all of me changed like midnight. It's almost like unfinished business in a way. If her first 7 albums are the TV show's original run and Folklore is the reboot, Midnights is like the first episode of the reboot where it starts to tie up all these little teeny tiny plot holes that were left in the original run. Midnight Rain being a reflection of a relationship that was good that she made some mistakes in. The Great War calls back to songs like Afterglow. In Afterglow, she sings, "I blew things out of proportion, now you're blue, put you in jail for something you didn't do." The song discusses the moment in a relationship that could have ended everything, and she's taking ownership and saying, "I'm sorry for that." A very similar theme to songs like Back to December. In The Great War, she sings, "And maybe it's the past that's talking, screaming from the crypt, telling me to punish you for things you never did, so I justified it." The protagonist is less apologetic, but it's still an expansion on that same moment. "I vowed not to fight anymore if we survived the Great War." And in Afterglow, you have, "I lived like an island, punished you with silence, went off like sirens, just crying, why'd I have to break what I love so much? It's on your face, don't walk away, I need to say, hey, it's all me." Karma is like an older, more based in reality retrospection of I Did Something Bad. Even their intros sound very similar. The intro on Karma is heavily filtered. It's not a direct interpolation or sample, but that sort of stringy instrumentation sets up the rest of the song. In I Did Something Bad, Taylor takes on a character who's being accused of several different things, but she owns it and just plays with it a little bit. I will do a deep dive on I Did Something Bad in a separate video because this song deserves its own video. If a man talks shit, then I owe him nothing. I don't regret it one bit because he had it coming. They say I did something bad, then why does it feel so good? In a lot of ways, this song directly talks to her accusers. But in Karma, the vibe is essentially, oh, you're here. Anyway, I Did Something Bad almost has a little bit of finality to it. It's saying, you're gonna burn me at the stake anyway, so just do it. Karma, on the other side, takes place later when it's revealed that the protagonist in I Did Something Bad didn't actually burn at the stake, and the people who accused her are just gonna get what's coming to them. I Did Something Bad is the younger, I'm still kind of angry about what you're doing. Karma is the older, well, I was right, so good luck with whatever happens to you. But Midnights is not also necessarily just directly retrospective, it's also introspective. Even though a lot of these songs are still retrospective, just hear me out. Antihero is obviously very introspective. This song really embodies that feeling of when you recognize your own bad behaviors, but you still don't quite know how to solve them. This song talks about all of the issues and why she is the way she is in this song, but it also doesn't quite solve them either. Antihero was dropped at the same time as Midnights, meaning no one knew what it was gonna sound like, and it introduces the introspective, retrospective feelings that are present throughout the rest of Midnights. Also, it's very radio friendly, which is why it was probably chosen as the lead single. Bejeweled can be seen as another introspective from Taylor on the way people perceive women at certain points throughout their lives. Taylor Swift is over 30, no kids, but she has her bag and a career. And for some reason, that is just mystifying to people that that's even possible for women to do. For some reason. As many Swifties know, You're on Your Own Kid is a retrospective / introspective look at Taylor's own life. Just like I Did Something Bad, I will do a separate video on Dear Reader specifically, because You're on Your Own Kid and Dear Reader are almost like brother and sister. Even Bejeweled can sort of be wrapped up in these three, because those songs are basically their own little micro category of giving advice. Part of being older is being wiser, well, hopefully. And this song beautifully gives some of the best advice that Taylor could give to her audience, especially her younger fans, while also simultaneously telling them to be cautious of who you take advice from. If you've seen any of my deep dives, you know that Taylor Swift has been the subject of media scrutiny on a whole unbelievable level for many, many years. My personal favorite lyric in this entire song is not necessarily its most deep, but it's, "Dear reader, bend when you can, snap when you have to. Dear reader, you don't have to answer just 'cause they asked you." Bend when you can, snap when you have to can be seen as sometimes you're gonna have to do the things that you don't want to, but it's okay, just do your best. It can be interpreted as give a little, take a little, but if you pair it in the context with the second line, you don't have to answer just 'cause they asked you. There is a time for being kind and being generous and being gracious, but sometimes people cross your boundaries and you need to let them know. I don't have time to get into everything, but there are a lot of different parallels and a lot of ways this album breaks down. Midnights is a fascinating record from start to finish. Even the album cover is a callback to the cover art of 1989 original version. It's a daring and unusual choice to have the track list on the front cover. The picture, whether it's your favorite or not, creates a mood, which is an emphasis on the Midnights album. This cover art might not be everyone's favorite cup of tea, but it does do the job of sending subtle messages to a potential listener as to what might be on the record. Midnights is not a greatest hits. It is not devoid of newness. For being very atmospheric and moody, it is almost like a celebration of her work in very subtle ways. Further emphasized by the fact that it's dropped during her re-recording project, which sees Taylor returning to her previous work and makes the songs that she may or may not reference on this album from the past relevant again, thus inspiring her new fans to check out all of her discography. So whether you are an older fan or a newer fan, you can still have fun and enjoy the ERAS Tour, a celebration of her discography and career. Taylor Swift's ERAS Tour is one of the most brilliant things she has ever done, and I think it's a moment in music history that will always be remembered. There are a very few select artists, tours, albums, and songs that resonate with the general public so deeply that essentially cause them to become immortalized. Michael Jackson's Thriller album and song has taken on a life of its own as time has gone on, even throughout multiple different generations. Elton John's Yellow Brick Road tour is currently the highest grossing tour of all time, grossing over $939 million. Because Elton John is a well-respected and deeply loved artist in the industry. Beyoncé is another one of the greats, contributing so much to pop culture, and her Lemonade record specifically is still deeply loved by millions of people around the globe. Britney Spears' Baby One More Time is one of the best-selling records of all time and went #1 in over 22 countries back before streaming and digital downloads were even a concept. Madonna is legendary for challenging industry standards and setting a precedent for what was possible in women in music. Janet Jackson is the female pop star blueprint for what we know them to be today, and her song Rhythm Nation in particular created a whole cultural movement. And if there is anything that has sealed Taylor Swift's fate as one of the greats and why she rightfully deserves to be included with the list of names I just mentioned, it is the ERAS Tour. As I've said before, Taylor Swift is from the old music industry, where every time you write an album, you go out and tour for it. But she has achieved a level of success where she can write her own rules. And the ERAS Tour has come about in one of the wildest times in music and one of the wildest times in her career. Artists re-recording their music from their old labels to reclaim ownership of them is not a new concept. There is a reason why in recording contracts there is what's called a re-recording clause, which for summary purposes, in case you don't know, says that an artist can re-record their own music after a certain set period of X amount of years, usually between 5 and 10. Reba McEntire has re-recorded some of her catalog. JoJo re-recorded her first 2 albums in order to claim ownership of them again. I've done several videos about JoJo's re-recording story over the years. The difference between Taylor Swift doing her re-recording project versus other people doing their re-recording projects is that she's one of the most high-profile artists to do it and call attention to it and educate the general public about it. Taylor really doesn't get the credit she deserves for music education. You can ask any Swiftie and they're probably gonna understand what a re-recording is versus an original master recording. They're probably gonna know the basic parts of a song, what a verse is, what a chorus is, what a bridge is, and why they're different. She's encouraged many people to learn how to play the guitar and how to play the piano. She leads by example when it comes to music marketing, which is why many Swifties can be both excited for new merch drops and 7 different versions of her album, while also simultaneously acknowledging that she is queen of capitalism. In a time where it was more common for songs to be written for you as an artist as opposed to you writing them, she encouraged her fans to pay attention to the lyrics, open the CD booklets, and pay attention to who's writing what. And now that she's on track to gross over $1 billion by next March from this tour alone, people are just now finding out some of the good things that she's done. For example, single-handedly probably averting the US from entering a recession following the pandemic, making life-changing donations to local food banks at every tour stop, giving her entire cast and crew over $55 million in bonuses. But these things are not new with Taylor. She has a long history of doing things like this, like paying for some of her fans' college tuition, donating all of her royalties from the sales of Ronin to fight childhood cancer, donating to the NAACP to fight racial injustice during the George Floyd protests, advocating and pushing for the Equality Act. The entire cast and crew of the ERAS Tour consist of a wide, diverse range of people. The point is, the ERAS Tour has gotten people talking, and I haven't even touched the music or the set list directly. At its very core, a music tour serves two purposes. Obviously, it's an opportunity for artists and fans to connect, but also to boost sales and to grow an artist's fan base. Of course, it is very common for artists to perform their past biggest hits for a new album's tour, but not when 90% of the setlist is performed in full without any intermissions. Not to mention that every single night the setlist changes so that every single show is unique. Not to mention that she's not playing all of her biggest hits. She's playing them and a whole bunch of hidden gems that you would only know if you've listened to her records. Don't Blame Me was not a single, but it most certainly is a fan favorite. Also, one of the songs is 10 minutes long and it's just her and a guitar playing, no backing track. All of her vocals are live. I've said this before, but the ERAS Tour is a celebration of Taylor's discography. It is not a farewell tour. She is not retiring. She is only 33. And everywhere she goes, she puts on a 3.5-hour show, non-stop. Even if it wasn't Taylor Swift, any artist who could do that is incredible. As I said in my deep dive on Midnights, the album contains a lot of callbacks to Taylor Swift's past music, which makes it even more fitting that she dropped it in the middle of her re-recording project, which gets even further highlighted because of the ERAS Tour. I think by now I've established why it's a testament to her as an artist. The ERAS Tour is so much more than just a way of making up for a music festival that got canceled, and trying to figure out how to organize a tour for 4 brand new studio albums since you last did something. Getting people to buy not only digital music, but physical music in this day and age is getting increasingly more difficult. But 1 out of every 25 vinyls sold in the US last year was a Taylor Swift record. You gotta be pretty damn good to be able to do that. Of course, we can dive really deep and talk prices, bulk buying, timed marketing, charting, stream numbers, SEO, keywords. We can dive into it all. But at the end of the day, your product still has to be good. Her entire store is just keywords, SEO, and creating a sense of urgency. But also her merch quality is good. She knows her fan base, she knows what we'll buy, she knows what we like to wear. The ERAS Tour is not just a product of the songs that she's written. It's a product of her skill level as an artist, it's a product of the level at which she knows her fan base, and it's a product of the times. We are still coming out of a time of severe isolation and separation from one another. And for many people, the ERAS Tour is providing a huge boost of serotonin, adrenaline, and happiness, to the point where people are actually having amnesia a little while later. And she knows that because it's not the first time she's provided escapism for her fan base during a period of global unrest. She did it the first time with Fearless during the recession. So yes, Taylor Swift is a brilliant marketer and she knows how to make money, but this woman also understands the true value of entertainment. Taylor's career has grown by leaps and bounds at an age where people expect you to be done, or to move on and do different things, which she's still capable of doing, except for the fact that she's made it very clear she wants to continue making albums. It should come as no surprise as to why people who attend the ERAS Tour feel so safe, and the atmosphere inside the stadium feels like a bunch of besties hanging out for a sleepover. She did that. She attracted those people to her music. She cultivated that fan base. I know there's been a couple of issues in the past, but any other artist would DMCA live streams of their concert, have people take down high quality videos of their tour, especially when a film is now officially confirmed. But when Ticketmaster made the mistake of being unable to handle the demand for this woman, she said she would find ways to make the ERAS Tour as accessible to people as possible. Yes, because she knows her fans, but also because she understands the true value of entertainment, as I previously said. And of course, because it boosts her career. The ERAS Tour successfully highlights the importance of her re-recording project, has tangible financial benefits to wherever she goes, ensures her constant state of virality, introduces new fans to her older music, gives her oldest fans a chance to see her perform her newest music. It's rewriting over the long history of criticism this woman has faced in her career, fights misogyny and the expectation of where women should be at certain ages in their lives, while also fighting misogyny and sexism within the music industry, converts some of her biggest haters into brand new fans, and improves mental health levels for those who see it. So yes, Taylor Swift is a brilliant businesswoman, but to try and reduce Taylor Swift, the Eras Tour, and the re-recording project as simply a cash grab is just not true. We are witnessing and living through something in music that history will definitely remember. No one knows what Taylor Swift will do next or what she'll even do 5 minutes from now. But the coolest thing about the Eras Tour is that the world is finally realizing how good this girl was from the very beginning.